everybody. Welcome back. 16 minutes after the hour, it's the Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX, and I want to welcome onto the program very special guest, former congressman from the 2nd Congressional District in Michigan from 1993 to 2001. Pete Hoekstra was appointed as the chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence from 2004 to 2007. He has visited more than 80 countries. He has met with dictators such as Muammar Gaddafi and Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president. And Muammar Gaddafi he met 3 times. And in his recent book, who is just out, Architects of Disaster, The Destruction of Libya, it points exactly to President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton as the destruction of Libya. And I'm quite frankly, my personal opinion, their political agenda is more important than the national security. And Pete Hoekstra, it's just great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
You know, I tell you what, you used words like deeply irresponsible behavior and self-deluded fantasy doomed to failure, and it just cuts right to the quick. And this book couldn't come out at a better time with the Benghazi attack, the hearings on Capitol Hill and Hillary Clinton, and now her being thrust ahead as the Democrat, soon to be the nominee, sure to be the nominee, with Joe Biden out of there. I guess my first question would be, what is the catastrophe of loss of intel? But people don't realize how bad of loss we had with this, do they?
They really don't. The loss is on a number of different levels. We went from an area, a huge area in northern Africa, the state of Libya, that was expanding its reach, but it stabilized northern Africa against radical jihadists. You didn't see people going from northern Africa into the soft underbelly of Europe. It was a stable region, and it was an anti-jihadist region. Gaddafi was helping us, and you're exactly right. I don't talk a lot about that in my book, but you point out that in addition to losing that stability, Gaddafi was a wealth of intelligence for us. As radical jihadism was spreading in northern Africa, Gaddafi had his tentacles throughout that region in a positive way, helping us understand what was going on, the threats that were happening in northern Africa. And as soon as Gaddafi's gone, not only do we lose the stability in Libya, but we lose the intelligence throughout much of northern Africa.
Pete, it's so interesting. And given the cover-up, and I want to ask you about this video cover-up that was so despicable, how she would lie to the families of the fallen, that when they come back to Edwards Air Force Base, there is no shame at a funeral service with caskets and flags. And they're lying to the public, and they're lying to these families. But the comment that she made, how could this happen in a country we helped liberate, in a city we helped save from destruction? She simply doesn't understand. What did you think when they put on this false narrative? You must have been outraged when you heard this.
Well, I was. I was actually running for the Senate back then, and I was concerned about this president and where he was going to be running, our foreign policy. And it's clear that from day one, he had decided that he could manage, he could work with, and he could trust radical jihadist groups. A fundamental shift in American foreign policy, and one that we, sadly found out in Benghazi was deadly wrong. You could not engage with these radical jihadists. Right after the attack, because the previous day there had been attacks in Egypt, I went to a number of my sources in the region, and I said, was this about this video or not?
Oh.
And the folks in Egypt said absolutely not. It was more about anti-Americanism and trying to find a way to release the blind sheikh by putting pressure on the U.S. government. But the video never came up, and now we know, that within hours of the attack, the secretary knew that the video was not the cause of this. It was an organized radical jihadist attack by people that we had allied with to overthrow Gaddafi. Well, that narrative couldn't be allowed to come out. So what they had to do, they had to talk about and create a straw man, which was this video, and that it was America's fault.
It's disgusting. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Pete Hoekstra. He's a former congressman from the 2nd Congressional District in Michigan, and he was the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence from 2004 to 2007. He's just put out a book, Architects of Disaster, The Destruction of Libya. And Pete, it's a wealth of knowledge. It's a great factual outlay of the Benghazi attack, and it's supported by your research relating to Colonel Muammar Gaddafi and being deposed and finally killed and bombed by the Allies and NATO. You know what? And this is, I've always been, I got to say, if they just came out at the Benghazi attack and said, you know, we were, CIA was involved, we can't discuss it, it's a matter of national security, I would have been fine with that, because I sensed that national security and the best intelligence in the world were over there, the committed individuals, the Americans protecting our interests, and I'm behind them 100%, because guess what? I want them to find the mustard gas that Gaddafi's lost.
Right. The problem that you have here though is the reason they didn't come out and say what they were, what you're articulating here is there was my belief, and I think there's a lot of evidence, and I can't quite figure out why the Benghazi Committee is not highlighting this. They need to highlight two things. We switched sides. We started to engage with radical jihadists. But the second thing is that America was funneling arms into Libya, and after Gaddafi was overthrown, we were funneling it to the same type of people that we supported in Libya who turned on us. We were supplying the same kind of people in Syria. And so we were giving weapons. Fighters were moving from Libya to Syria. And this is what morphed into what today we call ISIS. America was on the wrong side, and this is why I think politicians on the right and on the left are shying away from putting the real truth out there in terms of what was going on in Benghazi.
You know, Pete, I love what you put, and this, because I say, and Americans are frustrated. They want to know if a politician is not on the right side and they haven't done their due diligence. And you point out very clearly that Secretary of Defense Robert Gates and then Secretary of Central Intelligence Leon Panetta arguing strenuously against American involvement. And my point is, I always make this comment: why don't we, as Americans, why don't our leaders pay attention to the experts? But I love your comment about the competitive and the red team analysis. I just wish more politicians would quite frankly stick to their oath of office and then leave us with this.
I think, one of the problems that we've got today with our intelligence community, we need them to be an objective, independent voice. And too often in recent history, they've provided the information and the narrative that the politicians want to hear to move forward a specific policy.
Yeah.
We've lost the independent, objective nature of intel, and that's a huge problem.
And what's going to come out of this, Pete, now is the United U.S. Attorney General is not going to forward charges on the IRS and Lois Lerner, and this is a huge precedence related to intel and the intelligence community. And the only way they can do it is if they indict Hillary Clinton. There's no way they're going to indict her prior to a presidential election.
That's right, and I can tell you that with her emails and with her server and how she handled all of that, if I'd done anything close to that as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I would be prosecuted and I would be indicted.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd either be paying a huge fine or I'd be going to jail. Excuse me, but very similar to what happened to General Petraeus.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what Americans, because here's the frustration, and you mentioned in your book that a bipartisan effort is most important, and I support that wholeheartedly. We need to come together. We need to have a conversation. But how can we do it if the political agenda and the false narrative is just beating us to death? And then you've got Hillary Clinton above the law, clearly.
Yeah, well, we'll wait to see about that. But here, specifically, the FBI has not closed that investigation. We'll see exactly what happens over the next 4 to 6 weeks. But my fear is the same as yours, that the rules that apply to all the rest of us may not apply to her in this situation, and that that's a shame for the country, because this is a country where all the rules should apply all of us equally.
Well, exactly, the rule of law. And I tell you what, the founders of the Constitution, I mean, the oath of office, I barely can get past the oath of office and the oath of enlistment. And John Adams quoted, he said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And, if we don't stand on the rules and call them out, I guess my last question, Pete, before we go would be, for citizens of America, they want to hear if a politician is not doing their duty or if they are being incorrigible or out of line. How do we get that? I've always wondered, right? You're in Congress, you're seeing bad behavior. Why don't we hear about it until after it's too late?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, we've got, remember, 50% of the people can't, on a particular day, can't name their congressman.
I know.
So they're not watching. They have to be, a government like ours requires a vigilance. It's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book for political activists, and hopefully in such a way that, it's accessible and readable by everybody and understandable. Because the thing we need to do is we are educating and trying to engage the American people. The book, foremost, is to talk about Libya, but is also to highlight the threat from radical jihadism. The Bush administration soft-pedaled the threat. The Obama administration has really soft-pedaled the threat from radical jihadism. We need to recognize that this is a threat to our way of life. We're seeing what it's doing to the Middle East. We're seeing what it's already done and what it's starting to do in Europe. We need to recognize the threat, confront it, contain it, and ultimately defeat it. It's why all the proceeds from the book, if you buy the book, I don't get any of the revenue. The book, the money for the book, any money that the book makes goes directly to the work here at the Investigative Project on Terrorism. Steve Emerson, they've done phenomenal work for 20 years. We want to keep that work going.
Absolutely. And Pete, I was going to mention the Investigative Project on Terrorism. You can get to investigativeproject.org. It's a wonderful website, a wealth of knowledge. And Pete, we're out of time, but it's fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, former congressman from the 2nd Congressional District in Michigan from 93 to 2011. He was the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence from 2004 to 2007. And he met Muammar Gaddafi 3 times, traveled 80 countries. And Pete, I'm just thankful for your service and appreciate the book.
We'll talk to you again soon. We'll look forward to it.
We would love it very much. All right. The Architects of Disasters, the book out on Amazon, The Destruction of Libya. Take it, get it. You won't believe it. You won't be able to put it down. We got to get to a break. We'll be right back. More on the Sunrise Show